or?
Well, I think that's a really interesting question. I think you're right. Most of the American population, over 90% of Americans, attended public schools.
Wow.
Most Americans are not products of private schools, though we have some fine private schools in this country.
Yes.
And so, in many respects, the public pre-K-12 schools have served the American population well. And most people, while we certainly would want to see teachers making those executive salaries and having those parachute packages and all those kinds of things that seem to have qualified life on Wall Street.
Sure.
Most folks don't know that when we look at the top, if you took the top 4 most lucrative bachelor's degrees, I'm talking about bachelor's degrees that upon graduating in 4 years, the likelihood of your getting a job with a competitive salary and benefits is high. That those 4 majors tend to be traditional fields, education, teachers in particular. So a bachelor's degree in any field of education, elementary, secondary ed, nursing, engineering. I'll say engineering / computer sciences,
Sure.
and then accounting. Those are the 4 fields when folks graduate in 4 years, they're likely to be able to move immediately into a job. And people don't oftentimes recognize that. The other thing I say about teaching is it's a gateway profession. It happens to be one of the professions with the highest percentage of first-generation college attendees. Over 80% of newly minted teachers are the first person in their family to go to college, which means that when you're in these education classes, the likelihood of your being with someone who has a similar family background in terms of college attendance is very, very high. And it's a gateway profession. I began my career, though I went on to get a PhD in education policy and leadership and ultimately became a dean. I began as a classroom teacher, a 4th grade teacher, and then was a junior high school teacher, and would teach if no one paid me. Even when I was working on my doctorate, I thought, I may go back to the junior high school setting if I didn't go on to pursue a career in university teaching. My father is a dentist, but he began his career as a science teacher in D.C. public schools years and years ago. So teaching is a gateway profession. We certainly want to see teachers paid more. Nationally, the average salary for a beginning teacher tends to hover somewhere above the 50s with benefits and all those kinds of things, depending on the urban area and depending on the geographical region and school type.
Sure.
But I always cite those statistics to inform college students about their major choices because I think a lot of mythology dominates the conversation about what pays well after college.
Sure. And I think that's important to note. As you mentioned, teaching is a gateway profession. Not many people would come to understand the exposure that you've had as a result of being an educator.
Yeah.
And as you mentioned, the places that you've taught, but you've also delivered more than 75 keynote and invited addresses at national conferences, to include Harvard's conferences and other places you've been to. I think you were one of 50 American educators invited to attend a international conference on leadership and ethics held at University of Oxford. Those types of exposures, that's why I mentioned, you really are world renowned, but it really, and in the humblest way, as an educator. And then here you have the disposition that you would actually do it if you weren't paid, because it really does prepare all of us to be competitive in the global economy, the global society that we live in. And so I think those are characteristics and traits that a lot of our folks who may be listening, and even those who are deciding, a career path, some of our younger listeners or the parents of some of these listeners, it's a very noble profession. And I think, as they say, all of us can go back to name our favorite teacher or teachers. And I still can recall my teachers and educators at the elementary level. I remember from, I have a vague memory of pre-K, but kindergarten up.
Wow.
I remember everybody.
Oh, my goodness. Yeah. Well, I think people don't realize how young you kind of settle into certainly your view of the world and your aspirations for yourself. Because I can remember in 7th grade saying I could like teaching. I'd either wanted to be a teacher or an astronaut, and I still feel that way at this age, some decades later.
Yeah.
But I do think that students, whether they're in middle school or high school or college, there, as I said, there's a lot of mythology about surviving in the labor force and doing financially well, which is certainly the benefit of your show, to share information.